December 17, 1944. A snow-covered supply depot near Malmedy, Belgium. Obergefreiter Hans Wegner of the 12th SS Panzer Division crouches behind a knocked-out American truck, watching the last pockets of resistance collapse. His platoon has just overrun what their intelligence suggested was a minor supply point. But as Wegner surveys the rows of wooden crates and canvas-covered stacks disappearing into the morning mist, he realizes this is no minor depot. This is an entire American logistics base, and it's full. Within the hour, German soldiers are tearing open crates with a frenzy that has nothing to do with military discipline and everything to do with hunger. What they find inside those crates will fundamentally change how they understand the war they're fighting. Because it's not just food. It's abundance. It's variety. It's luxury items that German soldiers haven't seen in years. It's evidence that while they've been tightening their belts and making do with less, their enemy has been eating better than German civilians in peacetime. This is the story of how German soldiers discovered they weren't just losing the war on the battlefield. They were losing it at the dinner table. The attack on the American supply depot wasn't planned as a major operation. Wegner's company, part of Kampfgruppe Hansen, had been pushing west through the Ardennes as part of Operation Wacht am Rhein, the great offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Their orders were to maintain momentum, bypass resistance where possible, and drive for the Meuse River. But when scouts reported an American supply concentration with minimal security just 2 kilometers off their line of advance, Hauptmann Joseph Kessel made an immediate decision: detach one platoon, take the depot, secure whatever supplies could be quickly loaded, and rejoin the advance within 2 hours. It seemed like a minor tactical opportunity. Capture some American gasoline, maybe ammunition. Get the trucks moving again. Wegner's platoon drew the assignment. 32 men, 3 machine guns, 1 broken-down half-track that barely ran. They approached the depot from the north at dawn, through thick fog that reduced visibility to 50 meters. The Americans, rear echelon supply troops from the 7th Armored Division, were caught completely off guard. German intelligence had been wrong about the garrison's strength. There were perhaps 80 Americans at the depot, but most were drivers, clerks, and laborers. When German machine guns opened fire from the tree line, resistance was scattered and brief. 15 minutes of fierce fighting, then white flags appeared. The Americans retreated south in their vehicles, abandoning the depot. Wegner's platoon held the position, and what they found made them forget, for a moment, that they were in the middle of the largest German offensive in the West since 1940. They found food. More food than most of them had seen in one place in years. First impressions. Unteroffizier Kurt Baumer was the first into the main storage tent. A peacetime baker from Hanover, Baumer had been drafted in 1942 and survived the Eastern Front before transfer to the West. He was a practical man, focused on survival, not easily impressed. But when he pulled back the canvas flap and saw the interior of the American supply tent, he stopped dead. "Mein Gott," he whispered. The tent was perhaps 20 meters long and 10 meters wide. Wooden crates were stacked to shoulder height along both sides, leaving a central aisle. Each crate was stenciled with alphanumeric codes and English text. Ration, type K, dinner, or ration, type C, meat and beans. But it wasn't just the quantity, though there must have been hundreds of crates. It was the organization. Every box was labeled, stacked neatly, easily accessible. The Americans hadn't just dumped supplies here. They'd organized a distribution system. Baumer walked down the central aisle, reading labels. Cover, sugar, chocolate, cigarettes, tin meat, fruit bars, cheese, crackers. Items he recognized and items he'd never heard of. Other soldiers crowded in behind him, their discipline forgotten. Someone pried open a crate marked K-ration breakfast. Inside were smaller cardboard boxes, perhaps 15 centimeters long, 10 centimeters wide, 5 centimeters deep. Each box was a complete unit, sealed and labeled. Grenadier Franz Dietrich grabbed one and tore it open like a child on Christmas morning. Inside was a bewildering array of items packed in precise order. A small tin of ham and eggs, a packet of biscuits, a compressed fruit bar, instant coffee powder in a sealed packet, sugar tablets, 3 cigarettes in a waterproof wrapper, chewing gum, and toilet paper. Toilet paper. The Americans packed toilet paper in their combat rations. Dietrich stared at the contents spread across his palms. This was one meal. One breakfast. And it contained more variety than a German soldier might see in a week. "How much is here?" someone asked. Baumer did quick mental calculations. Each crate held perhaps 48 individual ration boxes. There were at least 20 crates of K-rations visible in this tent alone. That was nearly 1,000 individual meals. And there were other tents, other crates. Enough to feed the entire battalion for days, Baumer said quietly. Maybe the whole regiment. Wegner appeared at the tent entrance. Stop staring and start eating, he ordered. We have 30 minutes before we move out. Hauptmann says take what we can carry and prepare to destroy the rest. But even as he gave the order, Wegner knew it was futile. His men were already tearing into rations with desperate hunger. And he couldn't blame them. He was hungry too. They were all hungry. The offensive had launched with promises of captured American supplies, because German logistics couldn't support the operation. Well, here were those supplies, and they were beyond anything Wegner had imagined. He grabbed a K-ration box marked dinner and sat down on a crate to examine it properly. The K-ration. Wegner opened the dinner ration methodically, cataloging each item as he removed it from the box. First, a small tin labeled meat and cheese. He used his combat knife to open it. Inside was a pressed loaf of processed meat and cheese combined, not appetizing in appearance, but it smelled edible. He tasted it cautiously. Salty, fatty, surprisingly flavorful. He ate half the tin in 3 bites, then forced himself to slow down. Next, crackers. Not the hard, tasteless Zwieback biscuits German soldiers received, but crisp, salted crackers that tasted of butter. There were perhaps 10 of them in a waxed paper packet that kept them fresh. A compressed fruit bar, dates and figs, sweet and dense with calories. Wegner ate half of it and felt the sugar hit his bloodstream. A packet of powdered lemon juice. Instructions in English suggested mixing it with water. Wegner pocketed it for later. 2 sticks of chewing gum. Wegner hadn't seen chewing gum since before the war. It seemed impossibly American, impossibly casual. Who packs chewing gum in combat rations? 4 cigarettes, Chesterfields, the packet said. Premium American cigarettes, not the harsh ersatz tobacco German soldiers smoked. Instant coffee powder and sugar. Wegner had been issued coffee substitute made from roasted barley for months. Real coffee was a distant memory. Matches in a waterproof wrapper. Toilet paper. A small piece of candy. And most surprising, a tiny wooden spoon. The Americans packed a disposable wooden spoon with each meal so soldiers didn't need to carry utensils. Wegner laid out all the items on the crate beside him. This was one meal. 1/3 of one soldier's daily ration. And it contained more calories, more variety, more comfort items than German soldiers received in an entire day. He did the mathematics in his head. The official German ration in 1944 was supposed to provide 3,000 calories per day. That was the official allocation. In practice, frontline soldiers often received far less. Supply difficulties, transportation problems, and shrinking food production meant actual rations frequently fell to 2,000 calories or less. Wegner had gone days on thin soup and hard bread. This single American meal, one of 3 the Americans received daily, probably contained 1,000 calories or more. 3 K-rations per day meant 3,000 calories minimum. And Wegner suspected the Americans received additional food beyond the K-rations. Hot meals when possible. Extra rations. Supplements. Baumer appeared beside him, holding a different box. Herr Obergefreiter, you should see the C-rations. They're even better. The C-ration. Baumer led Wegner to another section of the tent where someone had opened a crate of C-rations. These were larger tins, designed to provide a complete hot meal. The tin Baumer held was labeled meat and vegetable hash. He'd already opened it and eaten some. Taste this, he said, offering a spoonful. Wegner tasted it. The hash was a mixture of beef, potatoes, and vegetables in a rich gravy. It was designed to be eaten cold or heated, and even cold it was substantial and flavorful. This wasn't survival food. This was actual food, the kind you might order in a restaurant. Each C-ration has a main course like this, Baumer explained, plus a can of bread, a can of dessert. I found one with pound cake, and all the same extras as the K-ration. Coffee, sugar, cigarettes, candy. He showed Wegner the bread can. Inside was a dense, moist bread that had been pressure cooked in the can. It was sweet, rich, and would keep indefinitely sealed. There's also a can labeled chopped ham and cheese, another soldier called out. And one with meat and beans. Wegner walked through the tent, watching his men eat. They weren't just eating, they were gorging themselves. Soldiers who'd been on reduced rations for months were consuming American food with desperate intensity. One young grenadier, Hans Pfeiffer, just 18 years old and conscripted 4 months earlier, sat on the ground surrounded by opened tins. He'd eaten an entire C-ration, main course, bread, dessert, and was starting on a K-ration. His face was smeared with food and he was crying. "Pfeiffer," Wegner said gently. "What's wrong?" The boy looked up, tears streaming down his face. "My mother," he choked out. "My mother in Hamburg is starving. She writes that their ration is 800 calories per day. Vegetables and bread, no meat. And the Americans throw this away if they don't want it. I found discarded K-rations in the trash pile. They just throw them away." Wegner had no answer. He squeezed Pfeiffer's shoulder and moved on. The logistics system. While his men ate, Wegner explored the depot more systematically. He needed to understand what he was seeing. The depot covered perhaps 2 hectares. There were 5 large tents, numerous canvas-covered supply dumps, and a motor pool with 20 trucks in various states of repair. He walked through the supplies methodically, taking notes. Rations, at least 10,000 individual K-rations, 5,000 C-rations, cases of D-ration chocolate bars, emergency rations, each bar containing 600 calories, and several pallets of what the Americans called 10-in-1 rations, large crates designed to feed 10 men for 1 day. Coffee and sugar, hundreds of kilograms in bulk containers, plus the individual packets included in each ration. Cigarettes, cases upon cases. Chesterfields, Lucky Strikes, Camels. American soldiers apparently received cigarettes as standard issue, not as luxury items to be rationed carefully. Medical supplies, sulfa drugs, morphine, bandages, plasma, in quantities that suggested the Americans didn't worry about conservation. Comfort items, soap, razor blades, toothpaste, writing paper, playing cards. The Americans apparently believed soldiers needed morale-boosting luxuries. Gasoline and oil, thousands of liters in jerry cans, plus barrels of lubricants and fuel additives. The sheer abundance was staggering. But what struck Wegner most was the organization. Every item was catalogued, labeled, and stored systematically. There were clipboards hanging in each tent with inventory lists. The Americans knew exactly what they had and where it was. This wasn't a forward depot scraping by with minimal supplies. This was a well-stocked warehouse that received regular resupply. Baumer found the depot's operational logs. Fortunately, one of the German soldiers spoke enough English to translate. The logs showed that this depot received supply convoys 3 times per week. Regular, scheduled deliveries. The Americans had enough logistics capacity to maintain routine resupply even to forward positions. 3 times per week, Baumer repeated. Our battalion hasn't received regular supplies in 2 months. We get whatever the quartermaster can scrounge whenever transport is available. The Americans get scheduled deliveries like it's a grocery store. Wegner looked at the dates in the log. The last delivery was yesterday. The Americans were operating with such abundance that they maintained this much food at a forward depot and still resupplied it twice weekly. Comparison with German rations. That evening, after the company had moved out, taking as many American supplies as they could carry and reluctantly destroying the rest, Wegner sat in a captured American foxhole and made detailed notes. He needed to document what they'd found, because the implications went far beyond a lucky supply capture. He started with German rations. The official allocation in late 1944 was 700 grams of bread per day, often reduced to 500 grams, 120 grams of meat per day, usually in the form of sausage or canned meat, 200 grams of vegetables, often potatoes, 25 grams of fat, 25 grams of sugar coffee substitute, no real coffee available, occasional supplements, cheese, jam, tobacco when available. This was supposed to provide 3,000 calories, but in practice, supply difficulties meant soldiers often received far less. Wegner couldn't remember the last time his platoon received full rations. The quality was poor. The bread was often moldy by the time it reached frontline units. The sausage was mostly filler with minimal meat. The vegetables were usually turnips or rutabagas, never fresh. Coffee substitute tasted like dirty water. And that was for frontline combat troops. Rear echelon personnel received even less. Civilians in Germany were on near-starvation rations. Now compare the American K-ration. Each complete K-ration, 3 meals, provided. 3 main courses, meat and cheese, ham and eggs, chopped pork, 9 biscuits or crackers, 3 fruit bars, coffee, sugar and lemon powder, 9 cigarettes, chewing gum, candy, salt tablets, toilet paper, matches. Total calories, approximately 2,830 per day from K-rations alone. But the Americans also provided hot meals when possible, supplementary rations, and extra food through unit messes. Effective American soldier calorie intake, probably 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day. Effective German soldier calorie intake, 1,800 to 2,500 calories per day, and declining. But it wasn't just calories. It was variety, quality, and psychological impact. The American rations included comfort items, cigarettes, candy, gum, that boosted morale. They included complete proteins and fats that sustained energy. They were packaged for individual consumption, reducing supply chain complexity. German rations required field kitchens and preparation. The Americans could eat from individual packages while on the move. The strategic implications were profound, and Wegner knew it. The men's reaction. Over the next 3 days, as the offensive pushed west, Wegner observed how the captured American rations affected his men. Morale initially spiked. Soldiers who'd been hungry for months suddenly had full bellies. The cigarettes were traded like currency. One American cigarette could buy favors or extra food from soldiers who'd received less in the distribution. But then the rations ran out, and the men were back on German supplies. The contrast was devastating. Grenadier Otto Stein, a veteran of 3 years' service, came to Wegner on the 4th day of the offensive. "Herr Obergefreiter, when do we get more American rations?" "We don't," Wegner said. "We eat what our quartermaster provides." Stein held up his daily German ration. A chunk of hard bread, a slice of sausage that was more sawdust than meat, and a whizzing potato. "This is starvation rations. The Americans eat like kings and we starve. How are we supposed to fight like this?" It was a dangerous question. Defeatist talk could get a soldier shot. But Wegner couldn't disagree. "We fight because we're German soldiers," Wegner said, but the words felt hollow. The psychological impact rippled through the company. Men who'd eaten American rations for 3 days and then returned to German supplies felt the deprivation more acutely. Hunger had been a constant background condition they'd learned to ignore. Now, having experienced abundance, the hunger was intolerable. Discipline began to fray. Soldiers started hoarding food, hiding extra portions, stealing from each other. The officers noticed but couldn't stop it. Everyone was hungry. Worse, the men began questioning the war itself. If the Americans had so much food they could stock forward depots with tens of thousands of rations and resupply them twice weekly, how could Germany win? The Eastern Front had taught them that numbers mattered. The American depot taught them that logistics mattered more. On December 22nd, the offensive stalled. Kampfgruppe Hansen had advanced 30 kilometers but could go no further. Fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, and stiffening American resistance stopped the drive short of its objectives. Wegner's company dug in near Mannheim, preparing for American counterattacks. That evening, Hauptmann Kessel summoned his section leaders to company headquarters, a commandeered Belgian farmhouse with intact roof and walls, a luxury in winter. Kessel had been ordered to provide an intelligence report on the captured American depot. He wanted input from the soldiers who'd actually been there. Wegner described what they'd found: the quantity, the variety, the organization, the resupply logs showing regular deliveries. Kessel listened, taking notes. "How does this compare to our logistics?" Ballmer answered, "Herr Hauptmann, there is no comparison. We received our last regular supply delivery 2 weeks ago. Since then, we've been drawing from reserves. The Americans were receiving deliveries twice weekly to a forward depot. They have a functioning supply chain. We have a broken one." Kessel frowned. "Strong words, Unteroffizier." "True words, Herr Hauptmann. I saw the depot logs. I saw the quantities. The Americans are operating with logistics capacity we can't match." Another section leader, Feldwebel Paul Richter, spoke up. "The men are asking questions, Herr Hauptmann. They ate American food for 3 days. They saw the abundance. Now they're back to short rations, and they're wondering how we can win a war against an enemy that feeds its soldiers like that." Kessel was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Those questions are above our pay grade. Our job is to fight. The generals will worry about logistics." But Wegner saw doubt in Kessel's eyes. The Hauptmann was thinking the same thing they all were. The generals should have worried about logistics before launching an offensive that depended on capturing American supplies. The strategic reality. What Wegner and his comrades didn't know, but would learn in the weeks ahead, was that the captured depot near Malmedy was typical of American logistics, not exceptional. The United States in late 1944 was producing food in unprecedented quantities. American agriculture, mechanized and efficient, generated massive surpluses even while feeding the civilian population and allied nations through Lend-Lease. American food production in 1944. 100 million tons of grain, 13 million tons of meat, 120 billion pounds of milk, fruits, vegetables, and other commodities in similar abundance. The U.S. military could requisition whatever it needed without impacting civilian consumption. Rationing existed in America, but it was mild compared to European standards. American civilians in 1944 ate better than German civilians in peacetime. This abundance translated into military logistics. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps operated a global supply network that delivered food to every theater. Ships carried rations across the Atlantic. Trucks distributed them from ports to depots to units. The system was so efficient that waste was common. Units disposed of excess rations because storage was more complicated than requisitioning fresh supplies. Compare Germany's situation. Germany's agricultural production was declining due to labor shortages, farmers conscripted into the military, lack of fuel for mechanized farming, and Allied bombing of transportation networks. Food imports from occupied territories were decreasing as those territories were liberated or their populations turned hostile. By late 1944, German food production. Grain production, down 30% from 1939 levels. Meat production, down 40%. Fat production, down 50%. Transportation network damaged by bombing, reducing distribution efficiency. The German military competed with civilians for limited food supplies. Rations were cut repeatedly. Frontline troops received priority, but even their rations were substandard. Rear echelon personnel and civilians received far less. The Wehrmacht's logistics system was breaking down. Horse-drawn transport, still the primary method for German supply, required fodder for horses, which competed with food for humans. Fuel shortages limited mechanized transport. Allied air superiority meant supply convoys were attacked regularly. The American depot that Wegner's platoon captured represented logistical capacity that Germany simply didn't possess. The twice-weekly resupply schedule, the abundance of rations, the variety and quality, these were products of an economic and industrial system operating at a level Germany couldn't approach. Nutritional impact on combat performance. What the German soldiers experienced intuitively, military scientists understood analytically, nutrition directly affects combat performance. A soldier operating on 1,800 calories per day when he needs 3,000 is in a caloric deficit of 1,200 calories daily. Over a week, that's an 8,400 calorie deficit, equivalent to losing over a kilogram of body weight. Sustained caloric deficit causes reduced physical strength and endurance, slower reaction times, impaired decision-making and judgment, decreased resistance to cold, a critical factor in the winter Ardennes, weakened immune system, leading to higher rates of illness, reduced morale and mental resilience. German soldiers in the Ardennes offensive were operating on caloric deficits. They were literally starving while fighting. American soldiers, fed 500+ calories daily, maintained strength and endurance. They could march further, fight longer, and recover faster. This wasn't the only factor in the offensive's failure, but it was significant. German units that achieved initial breakthroughs couldn't sustain momentum partly because the soldiers were exhausted and hungry. Wegner saw this in his own platoon. By December 24th, the men were visibly weaker. They moved slower. They couldn't carry as much equipment. Combat efficiency degraded. American units that counterattacked on December 26th were better fed, better rested, and more capable of sustained operations. The food gap translated into a combat effectiveness gap. The cigarette economy. One unexpected aspect of the captured American rations was the cigarettes. Every K-ration included 3 cigarettes. C-rations included 4. D-rations included 5. American soldiers received so many cigarettes through rations that smoking was universal and extras were used as currency. For German soldiers, cigarettes were a luxury. Official tobacco rations were irregular and the quality was poor, often ersatz tobacco mixed with plant matter to stretch supplies. When Wegner's platoon captured American rations, they captured hundreds of packs of premium American cigarettes. The impact on morale was significant. Cigarettes served psychological functions beyond nicotine addiction. They provided a moment of relaxation in combat stress, a ritual that created mental space between dangers, a social bonding activity, sharing cigarettes built camaraderie, currency for informal economies, trading cigarettes for favors or goods. The abundance of American cigarettes highlighted another aspect of American logistics. They could afford to provide non-essential comfort items because their production capacity was so vast. Germany couldn't spare resources for comfort items. Everything went to essential military production. Soldiers made do without. The contrast was demoralizing. The Americans didn't just have more food, they had luxuries. They were fighting a war of abundance while Germans fought a war of scarcity. Grenadier Pfeiffer said it best. They include cigarettes and candy in their rations. We can't even get enough bread. How do you fight an enemy like that? The letters home. German military censors monitored soldiers' letters for security violations and morale indicators. After the Battle of the Bulge, letters mentioning captured American supplies increased dramatically. Censors reports from late December 1944 and January 1945 noted recurring themes. Soldiers described the quantity and quality of American rations with amazement. They compared them unfavorably to German supplies. Many expressed doubt about Germany's ability to win the war given the disparity in resources. Some excerpts from letters that passed through censors, translated from German. We captured an American supply depot. You cannot imagine what we found. Food, cigarettes, coffee, real coffee, not the substitute we drink. Each American soldier gets more in one day than we get in a week. How can we win against such an enemy? I ate American rations for 3 days. Real meat, chocolate, white bread. Now I'm back to turnip soup and moldy bread. Mother, if the Americans have this much food at the front, what must they have at home? How can we compete? The Americans throw away food we would treasure. I found discarded K-rations in a trash pile. They had been opened, one item eaten, and the rest thrown away. We are starving and they throw food away. This war is already lost. This last sentiment, this war is already lost, appeared frequently enough that censors flagged it in reports to senior command. The morale impact of discovering American logistical superiority was significant and measurable. Soldiers who'd seen captured supplies expressed more doubt, more defeatism, more war weariness than those who hadn't. The German high command recognized this but could do nothing about it. They couldn't match American production. They couldn't improve German rations significantly. All they could do was suppress defeatist talk and hope discipline held. By January 1945, the Ardennes offensive had failed. German forces retreated to their starting positions, having suffered heavy casualties and exhausted their reserves. Wegner's company returned to defensive positions in the Siegfried Line. Of the 32 men who'd captured the American depot on December 17th, 18 remained. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. Wegner survived. So did Bomber. Pfeiffer died on December 28th, shot by an American sniper. In late January, Wegner was summoned to battalion headquarters. A staff officer from Army Group B wanted to interview soldiers who'd captured American supplies. They were compiling an intelligence assessment. The officer, a Hauptmann with staff tabs and a clean uniform that suggested he spent more time in rear areas than frontline positions, asked detailed questions. Describe the rations you found. Wegner described the K-rations, C-rations, D-rations, and 10-in-1 rations in detail. Estimate the caloric content. Approximately 3,000 calories per day from K-rations alone. Possibly 3,500 to 4,000 with supplements. Compare this to German rations. There is no comparison, Herr Hauptmann. The Americans eat better than we ever have. Their rations are more abundant, higher quality, and include luxury items we haven't seen in years. What was the psychological impact on your men? Wegner chose his words carefully. The men were grateful for the food, but seeing American abundance made them question our ability to win. If the enemy has so much while we have so little, how can we prevail? The staff officer frowned. That's defeatist talk, Obergefreiter. That's honest assessment, Herr Hauptmann. You asked for my observations. Those are my observations. The officer made notes without responding. After the interview, Wegner never saw the resulting intelligence report. He doubted it would change anything. The generals knew Germany was running out of resources. One more report documenting American superiority wouldn't matter. Individual stories. Among Wegner's platoon, different soldiers reacted differently to the experience of eating American rations. Kurt Bomber, the baker, approached it professionally. He examined the American rations with a tradesman's eye, noting the packaging, preservation methods, and nutritional composition. He tried to calculate how the Americans produced such rations at scale. He concluded it required industrial food processing capacity that Germany lacked. After the war, he returned to baking and never spoke about his military service. Otto Stein, the veteran complainer, was briefly satisfied when eating American rations but returned to complaining once they ran out. The experience made him more bitter, more convinced the war was a waste. He deserted in March 1945, was caught, and was executed by military police. Franz Dietrich, young and still somewhat idealistic, was shaken by the American rations. He believed German propaganda about American decadence and weakness. The rations suggested otherwise. A wealthy, organized nation with vast industrial capacity. His faith in German victory wavered. He survived the war, immigrated to Argentina, and died in 1982 without ever returning to Germany. Hans Pfeiffer, the youngest soldier, saw the American rations as confirmation that his mother was starving while enemies ate well. The injustice of it broke something in him. He became reckless in combat, as if seeking death. He found it on December 28th. Each soldier's response was personal, but the cumulative effect on unit morale was measurable. After experiencing American abundance, the platoon's combat effectiveness declined. They fought when ordered but without conviction. After the war, military historians and nutritionists analyzed the American ration system that had so impressed German soldiers. Their conclusions validated what Wegner had observed. The American military ration system was a masterpiece of industrial food production and logistics. K-ration development. Developed in 1942 by physiologist Ansel Keys, the K stood for keys. The ration was designed to provide complete nutrition in a compact, lightweight package. Each component was selected for nutritional density, shelf stability, and morale value. The 3 meals, breakfast, dinner, supper, provided different menus to reduce monotony. The inclusion of cigarettes, candy, and gum was deliberate, morale boosters based on psychological research showing that small luxuries disproportionately affected combat motivation. C-ration development. The C-ration, C for canned, was developed earlier in 1938 and refined throughout the war. The use of pressure-cooked cans allowed bread and meat to be preserved for years without refrigeration. Each can was a complete nutritional unit. Production scale. By 1944, American food companies were producing 105 million K-rations per year, 500 million C-rations per year, billions of individual components, cigarettes, candy, coffee packets. This required converting civilian food processing facilities to military production, developing new preservation technologies, and creating a global distribution network. The system worked because America had industrial capacity to produce millions of rations, transportation networks to distribute them globally, raw materials, food, tin, paper, in abundance, organizational skills to manage complex logistics. Germany lacked all 4 elements by 1944. Wegner survived the war. He was captured by American forces in March 1945, spent a year in a POW camp, and was released in 1946. In the POW camp, he was fed American rations. K-rations initially, then C-rations, then hot meals prepared by U.S. Army cooks. He gained 15 kilograms during his year of captivity. The irony wasn't lost on him. He ate better as a prisoner than he had as a soldier fighting for Germany. In 1952, an American military historian interviewed former German soldiers for a study on the Battle of the Bulge. Wegner was one of the interviewees. Asked about the most significant factor in Germany's defeat, Wegner didn't mention tactics or strategy or weaponry. "We were starving," he said simply. "The Americans were eating chocolate and smoking cigarettes. How do you fight an enemy like that? You can have the best weapons, the best training, the best tactics. But if your soldiers are hungry and theirs are well-fed, you lose. We lost the war at the dinner table." The interviewer asked if Wegner thought different German leadership could have changed the outcome. Wegner shook his head. Leadership didn't matter. Resources mattered. America had resources we couldn't match. I saw it in that supply depot in December 1944. They had so much food they threw it away. We had so little we were starving. That's not a gap you close with better leadership. That's a gap that determines who wins the war. The interview was included in the historical study, though Wegner's name was changed to protect his privacy. He died in 1978, having spent his post-war years as a postal clerk in Cologne. He rarely spoke about the war except to say that he'd been hungry for most of it. The story of German soldiers discovering American ration superiority is more than an anecdote about food. It's a window into the fundamental asymmetry that determined World War II's outcome. Germany fought a war of scarcity. Every resource was precious. Every gallon of fuel, every kilogram of steel, every soldier's meal had to be carefully rationed. The entire economy was mobilized for war, but it wasn't enough. America fought a war of abundance. Resources were vast enough that waste was tolerated. Soldiers threw away rations because carrying them was inconvenient. Vehicles were abandoned rather than repaired because new ones were readily available. Ammunition was expended freely because resupply was certain. This abundance didn't just mean better fed soldiers. From it, higher morale. Soldiers who were well-fed, well-equipped, and knew they'd be resupplied fought with greater confidence. Operational flexibility. Commanders who didn't need to conserve resources could be more aggressive, more creative, more willing to take risks. Sustained operations. Well-fed armies could maintain combat operations longer than hungry ones. Lower desertion rates. Soldiers who believed their nation could provide for them were less likely to abandon their posts. The K-rations that amazed German soldiers in December 1944 were a symbol of this abundance. They weren't the most important factor in Allied victory. That honor belongs to industrial production, manpower, and strategic decisions. But they were a tangible, daily reminder of the resource disparity. When Hans Wegner opened that K-ration box on December 17, 1944, he wasn't just finding a meal. He was discovering evidence that Germany had already lost the war. The cigarettes, the chocolate, the real coffee, the toilet paper, these weren't just supplies. They were proof that America could afford luxuries while Germany struggled to provide necessities. Wars are fought with weapons, but they're sustained by logistics. The side that can feed, fuel, and equip its forces will outlast the side that cannot. Germany could not. America could. And in the end, that made all the difference.